G'day folks, Tassie Flybike here to give you a review of the Honda CRF 250L. This one's mine and I bought it in 2016. It's currently got 2,500 kilometres on it. Look, I'm going to start off and tell you, I love this bike. It's not perfect, but it's perfect for me, and I'll tell you why. The first thing I like about this bike is it's a Honda and it's fuel injected, and that to me says reliability. Now secondly, this bike only needs to be serviced every 10,000 kilometres. A lot of the modern dirt bikes, you're having to rebuild heads every 1,000 kilometres or so because they've got the performance tuned up so high. So this bike's tuned down, but that makes it reliable, and it also makes it cheap on fuel, which I love. Another thing I like about this bike is the seat height. It's a bit lower than most of the dirt bikes on the market at the moment, and for me that's a bonus. I find the others are just a bit tall for me to feel comfortable, particularly when I'm off-road. So if you look at things like the WR250, the Suzuki DRZ 400, or even the DR650, which were all bikes that I was considering, they're quite a bit taller than this, and that was something that definitely swayed my decision. The other thing about these bikes is that they're quite a bit cheaper than anything else on the market. They're priced at a low price point. It does mean Honda's cut corners on a few things, but as someone who likes to tinker and modify, well, in fact that's a bit of a bonus for me. I've got a bit more cash in my hip pocket so that I can do those modifications, and there's a fantastic user forum out there on a site called Thumper Talk. I've got a forum just for this bike. There's people all over the world doing amazing things with them, tons of modifications, and lots of advice in terms of common faults and common modifications. So that was a bonus for me as well. In stock form, this bike is a bit underpowered. It's a cheap modification. You spend 20 bucks and you change the standard 14-tooth front sprocket down to a 13-tooth. And I've got to say, it makes an enormous difference to the bike. But I wanted a little bit more personally. Off-road, I needed slightly lower gearing, and I wasn't finding that my top speed was inhibited too much. So I went from a standard 40-tooth on the rear to a 44-tooth. So at 1342, the gearing on this bike has changed a lot, and that's really woken it up in terms of power. It's a cheap modification. It's about $160 all up, and bang for buck, the best modification you can do on one of these things. Another thing I'm a bit disappointed about with the bike, but again, it's probably where the cheap price point comes in. The stock forks on these are under-damped, and they're only sprung in one fork. So one fork is for damping, the other fork is for load. There is some modifications you can do. There's a company called Racetech. They manufacture a thing called the Gold Valve. That improves the damping, and they also have a kit where you can add another spring into the front. They do some changes to the rear shock, which again is under-damped. It's okay for my weight, but I've heard on the forum that guys who are a bit heavier, so I'm around 90 kilos, some of the guys who are a bit heavier find it to be just too soft in the back end, but it's been performing okay for me apart from the damping. There is another company called YSS, and they manufacture a replacement shock, which I'm told is very, very good. So I'll probably go YSS shock in the back and the Racetech Gold Valves and spring change kit for the front end. When I change the gearing, I've also thrown my speedo out by about 15%. That's easy math to do, so it doesn't bother me, but what does bother me is that it's also thrown the odometer out, so this bike is looking like it's done more kilometres than it really has, which is going to affect my resale value. So I've ordered from 12 O'Clock Labs a thing called a DRD Speedo Recalibrator. Hopefully that'll arrive fairly soon. It's a plug and play module, and you can basically adjust it to change your speedo readings to be accurate, essentially, which will make my odometer accurate, which is what I want. Some other modifications I did. I changed the standard bars. They were a steel bar, heavy, bit tacky, and I actually crashed pretty early on and damaged them. So I changed over to a Pro Taper Gold bar. I'm keeping a bit of a gold theme with the forks and other metalwork as I replace it. Also changed my standard grips, which were black, over to a red one. I'm going with a red and gold theme. I also installed some bar risers to lift the bars up a bit to make it a bit more comfortable when I'm standing up. And because of the filming I do, I've also added a 12 volt cigarette lighter accessory socket that I can plug in a USB adapter that I can charge up my phones and my cameras when I'm away from home. Standard exhaust on these is very quiet. Personally, that's a plus. I don't want to piss people off, but it's also made of steel, it's quite heavy, and it doesn't breathe particularly well. So I am planning to replace that steel exhaust with a proper set of headers and a lighter weight exhaust system, which will make the bike breathe a bit better. There's also some modifications which you can do to the airbox, again as a part of making it breathe better. But as soon as you've done that, you've changed the metrics, and you need to do something about the fuel programming for the engine. Now there's a number of companies which manufacture aftermarket plug-in devices where you can pretty much adjust the air-fuel ratio to your liking. A lot of them come standard pre-programmed for this bike and only require a minor tweak at the end. So when I eventually get around to replacing the headers and exhaust, doing the airbox modification, I'll be adding in a plug-in fuel controller just to get the bike tidied up. But I have to say, it's more in my pursuit for something more than something which is necessary. The gearing has done everything I wanted to do with this bike in terms of its power and acceleration, tractability off-road. I really don't need to chase down more power, but as I said before, I like to tinker, so I'm always going to be doing something extra around the edges. Now I also made myself a carrier rack that's made out of 19mm tubular steel and welded together. It's got a couple of mounting points on it, so at different times if I'm going fly fishing I can tie all my gear off there and my camera stuff fits in there. Or alternatively, I've built a custom dog carrier because I want to get rid of my car one day and I need the bike, it's got to be able to carry the dog. So I built a custom dog carrier and there's a video about that. These bark busters, I got them off a mate of mine. They were laying around in his shed, so I grabbed them and sanded them back a bit and gave them a spray paint, and I reckon they're looking pretty schmick. Now the final thing I did, the back end on these things as standard is really ugly. It's chunky and just doesn't match the fairly neat lines that the rest of the bike has. So I got myself a LED stop light and tail light, and it just compresses the whole back end, makes it look really neat. It's a pure cosmetic change, there was no other advantage to it, but I like the look of it, pretty happy with that. Now, this is probably my biggest negative on this bike. The front tyre on this thing is diabolical. It will kill you if you're not careful. Believe me, I said that, it will kill you if you're not careful. Now I'm a bit of a tight ass, so I haven't got round to replacing it because I keep going in my head, how bad can it be? But then every time I get onto a loose surface, this thing just gives way with absolutely no warning. It just doesn't grip off-road. When you look at it, it looks like it should work, but it doesn't. So here's my summary. I'm a 50-year-old bloke. I like to go fly fishing and I like to go into remote areas to do it. This bike gets me there cheaply, generally safely, and there's heaps of things I can do to modify it and make it exactly as I want. Honda CRF 250L, big thumbs up from Tassie Flybike.